Welcome to Sputnik, orbiting the world with me, George Galloway.
And back with me, Gayatri.
Remember the 5th of November. Most British people do, and all of my life it has been accompanied by a cacophony of fireworks and the blaze of bonfires. What is less well remembered is what it's all about.
On the 5th of November 1605, it was gunpowder treason and plot. Guy Fawkes, or Guido to give him his Sunday name, entered Parliament with the intention of blowing up the king and all of his ministers. Nowadays, the crime would be described as religiously aggravated by the fact that Guy and his fellow conspirators were Roman Catholics, whose terrorism, and it was almost the most spectacular act of terrorism in history, was motivated by the extreme anti-Catholic repression then present in Britain.
Joining us to discuss the Gunpowder Plot is Joe Cook, whose grandfather wrote one of the very first books broadly sympathetic to the man, if not his methods. I'm glad to say Joe is on board the Sputnik. Let's start, Joe, with what happened. What was planned to happen on November the 5th, 1605?
Well, essentially, a group of conspirators got together to blow up Parliament. They wanted to effectively kill the lords and the politicians that were making their lives hell, and in the process assassinate the royal family and have them eventually replaced with a Catholic monarch.
That's a spectacular plot. How close did it come to succeeding?
Very close. In fact, it was only a matter of hours before the bomb was set to blow, although it had been planned for, a year and a half, 2 years beforehand.
And how was it foiled? Did they have inside intelligence? Were they reading their emails?
It's possible that there's a few theories kind of bounded about. One is that there was a tip-off warning letter sent to a previously Catholic lord who sounded the alarm. Another one, which the book kind of talks about quite a lot, is that the government had an insider within the conspirators.
I don't think they would have allowed the plot to go that far if they actually had an insider in the ranks.
Well, that's possible, although the distribution and making of gunpowder was a government monopoly. So it's recorded at the Ministry of Defence. If there's any kind of sale or distribution of large quantities, it's recorded. However, in the months preceding the Gunpowder Plot, those records have mysteriously disappeared and haven't been found since.
Oh, wow. So what kind of man was Guy Fawkes?
Well, he was a very religious man. He was extremely brave and determined. When he was fighting in Holland as a foreign fighter alongside Catholic armies, his commanding officer said of him, he was a man of great piety, exemplary temperaments. He was a faithful friend, an enemy of broils and disputes, but most notably he said that he was remarkably punctual for his religious attendance. So extremely religious man, but extremely brave nonetheless.
And so he came back from Europe to effectively join the struggle here.
That's right.
He changed his identity, didn't he?
Yes, he had to use his alias of John Johnson because he built up such a reputation for his name on the continent. He'd also been given command of a company.
I must say Guy Fawkes is a far better name than John Johnson.
I think so. He even managed to personally petition the King of Spain and ask for help in defending Catholics at home in England. Of course, the requests weren't granted, and on returning home to England 12 years later, that's when he met with the Catholic resistance, or as they became known, the conspirators.
Joe, tell us more about the conspirators, what his role was within this group.
Yes, so the conspirators were 13 men, 10 of whom related by blood, Guy not included. Again, you couldn't describe them as ordinary criminals or rogues or terrorists. They were all nobles or gentry, landowners. The ringleader, Robert Gatsby, his own grandfather had served in the as Speaker in the House of Commons.
The Speaker of
the Speaker,
yeah.
and the Chancellor, apparently. So they couldn't be described as ordinary criminals, and they particularly chose Guy because of his reputation as a fearsome fighter, extremely brave, but also he had the knowledge how to store safely gunpowder, and he knew how to build bombs, something that these gents didn't exactly know how to do.
And what happened to him then after he was captured?
So once Guy was captured, he was taken to the Tower of London. By midnight, it said he was being examined. Examined, of course, was code word for tortured. And the senior interrogators at the time said of him that he was quite remarkable. He seemed completely unbreakable, unintimidated. They said he was constant, calm and settled. Guy kept his wits about him. He said that they had no authority to examine him, and that the king was neither his lawful sovereign nor appointed by God. Essentially, Guy was saying that he was acting out of duty, conscience and religion, and had no trouble with this at all.
And how serious was the torture?
Well, Guy was tortured for 4 days on the rack. Usually they said that just the threat of torture would make people confess, but it took 4 days of severe torture, personally authorised by King James, before he began to name names and confess. Once he'd named names, apparently Guy was then tortured severely for another 2 months out of revenge, personally sanctioned by King James.
And sentenced to death? What kind of death?
Well, he was to be hung, drawn, quartered, etc. But on top of that, because his sins were so grave, it was said that his head had to be decapitated because his thoughts were so wicked. His heart removed because he was so impure. His genitals removed because they didn't want the offspring of the devil, and so on. So he was debowed and his body was pulled in 4 parts, and they said it should be left for the birds to eat.
Sounds a bit like ISIS.
Worse than, possibly.
Worse than, yeah. Even ISIS didn't think of all of that. And yet, his name liveth on. I don't know how many people in my lifetime have, and I have myself many times, put a guy on top of the bonfire without actually knowing who the guy really was. And yet, it's still, until this week, celebrated Guy Fawkes Night.
Yes. Testament to how close he became, actually, to blowing up Parliament, I think.
Well, they used to joke when I first entered Parliament that the last man to enter Parliament with good intentions was Guy Fawkes. Yeah. How would it have changed the course of history in Britain if he'd succeeded?
Well, if they'd succeeded in bombing Parliament, first of all, they would have had to been successful in killing most of the royal family. And if they'd done that, then they would have to again have been successful in replacing them with a Catholic royal family. So it's anyone's guess, really, as to how it would have all turned out eventually.
I have trodden the boards underneath which the barrels, beer barrels, weren't they, filled with gunpowder, were settled. I give what I call the Guy Fawkes tour of Parliament, the alternative tour. How did they get in to Parliament and underneath where the king would be putting on his throne at the state opening?
Well, again, this is thanks to one of the conspirators, a Thomas Percy. He was a civil servant, so he had access to the House of Lords and Parliament. He was able to rent out rooms. And so he did this on behalf of the conspirators. And once they were in this room, it was Guy Fawkes' job to organise a mining operation, which was to transport these big kegs of what looked like beer, but was gunpowder hidden beneath them, into a room just beneath the House of Lords.
This very week, there were thousands of Guy Fawkes running around central London. The Million Mask March, the mask of Anonymous, is modelled on the face of Guy Fawkes. So not only has his name lived for centuries, even his face, his impression, has lived. Do you think, in a sense, there's, as your grandfather would have clearly liked, there's a partial rehabilitation, at least an understanding of why Guy Fawkes did what he did?
I think so. I mean, his name is synonymous with revolution, and so he kind of invokes that tradition in people.
And it's worldwide as well, I understand. It was not just London where the mask marched in their millions or thousands.
There was a Million Mask March across the world. That's right. And all of them were wearing Guy Fawkes' face.
Quite a legacy, I would say.
I'd say so.
It is. I think he's remembered more than the king he tried to blow up. Even I don't know which particular king that was. He was a foreign fighter. Nowadays, he would have been arrested on arrival back in the country as a foreign fighter. And of course, there are many people who would now conspire to blow up, if not the Queen, God forbid, then certainly the Parliament. The Parliament is in very low order, but nothing like then. The repression of the Roman Catholic faith in 1605 could scarcely be exaggerated. Priests, nuns, bishops hanged, persecuted, tortured, and the Catholic Church driven underground, literally into the forests.
That's right. I mean, as a Catholic, you were under curfew, so you weren't allowed to leave the area. The law stated that you must go to a Protestant church. And as a young man, Guy even knew someone who was executed just for saying Mass. On top of that, you know, just for the very fact of asking for leniency upon Catholics could get you a £1,000 fine, body parts chopped off and imprisoned.
It's a remarkable story. It is amazing that all these fireworks go off and nobody really knows why the 5th of November, why the Guy Fawkes night, why it's a guy on top of the bonfire. But I found the book absolutely fascinating. It's out of print now, I'm guessing. But there are other revisionist histories since that one. But it was an important one at the time. So I'm really grateful to your grandfather and to you for bringing us up to date on the real Guy Fawkes. Thanks, Joe Cook. Coming up after the break, the morals of Evo Morales. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Sputnik. President Evo Morales has been one of the best things ever to happen to Latin America. The revolution that Che Guevara gave his life for has come to pass, and it looks like Evo Morales. He has set the indigenous people free, grappled with the corporations extracting Bolivia's mineral wealth, joined the sub-continental fight for freedom and independence, and he's paid the price for being a freedom fighter president.
When he returned from Moscow last summer after his presidential jet was forced down for 13 hours in Austria on the orders of Washington, on the suspicion that Edward Snowden might have been with him on board, he said the following: "Some countries of Europe have to free themselves from the US empire. They are not going to frighten us because we are a people with dignity and sovereignty."
Joining us now to discuss the Bolivian transformation is Manuel Bueno, a lay official and activist with the trade union Unison. Manuel, thanks for joining us. He's a very popular leader, indeed more popular even than the other left-wing politicians ruling in Latin America now. How do you account for the 60+% that he's continually scoring?
A very revealing slogan of the election was Evo cumple, which means Evo fulfills his promises. And the results have been that because it now controls the wealth, a country that used to beg for aid has expelled the IMF, has a surplus on its balance of payments, has had a GDP that has grown 3.5 times the size from when he was elected, has had an average growth of 5.2% even during the worldwide recession. And of course, unlike other growths, it has actually been shared. I mean, the Constitution actually says that when there is growth, that should be reflected in salaries, and there's been a decrease. So, for example, in 2013, the growth was 6.8%, and people had a double bonus at Christmas. Of course, those were the employed people in formal jobs. So there's been a huge economic transformation and equality. The UN has recognized Bolivia as one of the countries that has achieved the greatest progress towards equality. 36% of the population that were extremely poor have been brought up to much more acceptable levels.
Well, I'd definitely vote for that programme and that record. How difficult has it been for him to do that? The remnants of the old power, you described them as neoliberal elements who were in control of the country, have they fought a rearguard action?
It has been, well, it has been very difficult because during the first election, some of the departments in the east where he didn't win the election, the controlling elites tried to use their position to secede under a slogan of autonomy, but all of that was militarily defeated. It was also politically defeated and ideologically defeated. And the result of that was that in every election since then, in all those departments, his vote went up, to the extent that in this election, out of the 9 departments in Bolivia, 8 were won by Morales and his party by about 2/3. The parliament, he has got a 2/3 majority now in both the Senate and the Assembly. So there were difficulties, but there was also great support because the other parties that had opposed him were so discredited, and neoliberalism had 20 years and had not delivered. It had actually given away the country's wealth, increased poverty, increased inequality.
I mean, Bolivia is a success story in many ways, but amongst the most notable is the transformation of the lives of the indigenous people, one of whom Evo Morales, of course, is. He once explained that his politics came out of his background, and that in his background there was no such thing historically as private property, that most things were held in common by the community and for the community. That must be a big part of his ideology.
It is. There are, I suppose, 3 strands to the ideology which is currently developing in the mass. One strand is from the old, particularly the Aymara and Quechua Inca type indigenous peoples, which were an organized large empire, which had a large amount of collective endeavor. The way they worked, it was mainly an agricultural society that needed an awful lot of cooperation to succeed in what's a very harsh environment, the Altiplano. And so there was that element of working together, communal sharing. So because those peoples suffered tremendous exploitation during the colony, the Spanish colony, thousands killed in the mines, etc. And this continued, not to the same degree, but to a large degree in the Republican period, where there was the peasantry were largely serfs. They clearly had a memory and a comparison with the previous situation. So there was an element, there was a movement called Catarista from a hero of the independence, Tupac Katari, who led an uprising, which longed to go back to that. The other aspect was Marxist socialists that came mainly from the trade union movement, and in particular the mining unions. So there was that element. And of course, there is the Latin American, Bolivarian sort of ideology that came with Chavez and Fidel Castro, you know, which is the ambition of integration, but not like the EU in a sort of institutionalized capitalism favoring the corporations, but by mutual benefit, you know, the integration of all the countries in Latin America, which to some extent has advanced. So there are all those elements that are combining and developing and evolving.
Fantastic fusion. Che Guevara was buried there. His bones are now back in Cuba. Does he have an honored place in the memory of the Bolivian people?
He does, yes, he does. The whole Cuban Revolution and the resistance to U.S. imperialism for all that period is symbolized in part by Che. Yeah.
So a few weeks ago it was Columbus Day, and even in the US they're now starting to protest this actual national holiday. And I was surprised to learn that Evo Morales, being such a hero for the indigenous, that actually Columbus Day is also still marked, at least marked, as a national holiday in Bolivia and many other parts of South America.
What's important about the liberation and advancement of the indigenous peoples in Bolivia is that it's not an anti-white movement. It's very much a positive integration. It's all about creating a nation by sharing and developing the mutual respects and traditions. And of course, in Latin America is a very varied country, you know, it is very heterogeneous. There are countries like Argentina who are mostly European immigrants.
Yeah.
There are countries like Brazil with a very large African population. There is a lot of mixture and mutual respect. The vice president to Alvaro Garcia, to Evo Morales, is a white person. I've noticed that how Evo quite often is giving a speech and he has Alvaro next to him, and he refers to him as my brother Alvaro. So it's very much about creating a new nation with mutual respect. It's not about being anti-white, it's being anti-imperialist. I'm sure Evo wouldn't have any enmity towards American workers in the way, but towards U.S. imperialism
no, it wasn't
and
the
the
American
corporations.
workers that forced his plane to land.
Exactly.
Manuel, thanks very much, and long live Evo Morales. And now it's your turn to tell us what you think through the portals of social media. What's rattling, Gayatri?
If Guy Fawkes would have acted out the Gunpowder Plot today, how would it be received as? Hemorrhoid answers, the Western Free Press would blame Russia.
Very good. I wasn't expecting that one. It's all Putin's fault. Yes.
Everything. Just blame it. Even that submarine, mysterious
the submarine that turned out to be a mammal. Yes.
And Jack Tipple answers, to some Google conspiracy theorists, probably an inside job. What has Evo Morales meant for Bolivia and its indigenous population? Jamie Bison answers, I'm an Irishman. I've never been to Bolivia, but Evo Morales is a hero. I envy Bolivia to have such a leader. And Nahid Akhtar answers more morals and humanity than all of the Western leaders when it comes to Palestinian suffering. A true leader who called Israel a terrorist state. Spot on.
He did.
He?
He did. He's a very brave guy.
Yeah.
He's not just confronting the corporations, confronting the despoilers of the environment, confronting Washington. He chose, could easily have sat it out, to confront Israel also after its recent aggression against Gaza.
And that's it for this week.
Which, alas, means that's the end of the show.
You can keep in touch with us on Twitter at RT_Sputnik and on Facebook on Sputnik on Russia Today. It's goodbye from me, Gayatri.
And from me, George Galloway. It's been marvellous.